Well, welcome to week 15. Only one more week to go. It's been a fun 4 months, I'm sure. I know you guys are probably glad to have this one behind you. There's been a lot of work, and you guys have done just extraordinarily good papers, and I appreciate them. I have a couple of your discussion boards to grade and some papers, and I just wanted to remind you to be working on your capstone paper. Now remember, in the 16th week, everything is due on Friday, not on Sunday. So I just want to give you a heads up on that. So it's Friday at midnight when everything is due. Let's see, you're going to be looking this week at the APA's guidelines for psychological practice with older adults. That is lengthy. You may want to, as I did, print it out and put it into a book that you can reference later. And then California's Citizens Guide for Preventing and Reporting Elder Abuse. Again, that might be worth printing out and saving for later when you're in practice. We're going to be going over Chapter 12, the special problems that older adults face. And then you'll be doing the discussion board. And the discussion board will be about the legal and ethical issues in working with older adults. So I want you to name at least one issue, describe it, and discuss the necessary measures that you're going to have to take to comply with it. And then, of course, answering to other students. By the way, I apologize, no picture of me this week. The camera's out. Hopefully that'll be fixed by next week so that I can say goodbye to y'all. If you have any special issues or problems, always feel free to contact me. All right, so let's get into Chapter 12. Probably the saddest one is suicide. The suicide rate for individuals 65 plus was 14 per 100,000 individuals. In the general population, the rate is 11. So it is higher the older someone gets. The proportion of successful suicides to attempted suicides is far greater in old age than in younger ages. So I think they've had longer to think about it and to go through with it. White males are most likely to commit suicide in later years. So again, you can look through the death rates by race and ethnic group as you go through there. The causes of suicide, medical advances, mean longer lives, but not necessarily better. And we're seeing that more and more. As people live longer, they are succumbing to much more chronic illness and pain, and then social isolation because their friends are dying off, and then alcoholism and drug abuse, especially with prescription drugs. Excuse me. The elderly face multiple losses with their peers, their loved ones, their abilities to get around, their goals in life. They seem, not open-ended anymore. And many health care professionals, treat long-term depression as normal for elderly. So, I don't know. I want you to think about that. Should it be normal for elderly? How can we, as healthcare professionals, help them live longer and live a full life rather than just existing? Choosing to die. The Hemlock Society was founded in 1980. They consider rational suicide a sound decision based on good mental health. The therapeutic intervention is by skilled professionals, and some elderly see suicide as a way to get control of their lives because they've been out of control. Of course, the line between rational suicide and other suicide is not clear, and as Christians, that's an ethical and spiritual issue that you would need to wrestle with as you think through that. Double suicide is when couples die together. I'm always reminded of The Notebook. That wasn't suicide, but it was incredibly touching, that older couple. The common pattern is the killing of a frail or dying wife followed by the husband's suicide. And that seems in many ways like kindness because he knows what she's been going through. But of course, for those left behind, it's very difficult. So, should the elderly have the right to choose death? I've discussed this with doctors who, of course, they take the Hippocratic Oath and, to always save lives and to never purposefully take a life. And so that's a difficult one for them because many times they're in a situation where they're seeing someone's life prolonged through artificial means and no one's pulling the plug, and yet they can't make that decision on their own. So the clues to watch for depression are changes in eating and sleeping patterns, unexplained fatigue or apathy, crying for no apparent reason, withdrawal, and loss of interest. All of those would be for suicide in younger people as well. The health experts anticipate an even higher rate of suicide as baby boomers reach age 65. Obviously, the more of us there are, the more chances of suicide. The unfortunate part of that is that there's so many more of us, it's going to be even more difficult for the caretakers. So crimes against older people, that's another major issue. Older adults are less likely to be victimized than younger adults, but they have a higher fear of crime than do younger adults. So they've seen more and they feel a lot more vulnerable. So their perceived vulnerability has serious psychological, physical, and financial consequences. So, and in most cases, the crimes against older people are against property. So why do you think that they consider themselves more vulnerable? I think that's in some ways kind of obvious. I mean, they can't get around as quick. They are weaker. They also know they're alone. They have fewer friends to call on. So think of some other reasons. So the fear of attack, fearfulness might be less evident in relatively age homogeneous neighborhoods. So if they're in an elderly community, then they feel a little bit more secure. And older people make context-based judgments about their safety. Older people are more afraid than younger people. Like I said, women are more fearful than men. That probably goes across the ages. African Americans are more fearful than whites. And those with less money are more afraid than those with more money. That might be because those with more money are able to afford better security. Residents of large cities are more fearful than residents of small towns and rural areas. Again, that would be because you know your neighbor. You feel more familiar. So there are community programs. We know of Neighborhood Watch to have an awareness of what's going on in all ages in your neighborhood. Granny squads of older people patrol neighborhoods and provide training to avoid being victimized. And then escort services to take people to stores and banks. There is reimbursement through the state for crime victims and mandatory prison sentences for violent crimes against the elderly, so that can help. Most crimes committed by elders are misdemeanors, so the actual older criminals are more misdemeanors. Shoplifting is common, and a lot of times that's a psychological thing rather than a need. Elderly prisons, prisoners is expected to increase, and the criminal activities most likely to be engaged in by older inmates are violence against a family member, white-collar crimes, drug sales, and alcohol-related crimes. So I'm going to guess that that's probably not the people in their 80s. It's probably more the 65-plus crowd. Older professional criminals remain active throughout life, or professional criminals remain active throughout life. And most leaders of organized crime are in their later ages. They finally moved up through the ranks if they survive long enough. More people are being sent to prison and receiving longer sentences, increasing the number of older prisoners. Older convicts tend to be chronic offenders, and the three strikes laws have increased the number of aging prisoners. So, whereas before, I believe they did not give older people as long as sentences, I think that that is changing now. And in some cases, it may be that, at least in prison, that they have 3 square meals. The problems of being an older prisoner is they don't fit into the younger population. And if you're an inmate, you're not eligible for Medicare or Medicaid, even though you are getting your health care and your food taken care of. And the prisoners tend to age faster than others. So there are alternatives: medical, parole or release, community placement, and special prisons or units. So what do you think is the best approach to dealing with elderly prisoners? Now, elderly abuse, this is one that you guys will have gone online and gotten the details on. But some of the highlights are battered parent syndrome, parents that are attacked and abused by their own children. The risk factors for abusive caregiving, obviously alcohol and drug abuse, cognitive impairment, economic stress, inexperience, or even a history of family violence, and if the elderly is dependent on the young person. Between 3 to 6% of community dwelling elders have been abused, and neglect is the most common form of abuse. So of the types of abuse, there's physical abuse, which is beating, choking, tying up, physical assault. There's psychological abuse, which is sometimes even worse: threats, intimidation, verbal abuse. Financial, material abuse, theft, deception, mismanagement. That's difficult to prove and difficult to get prosecuted, unfortunately. And violation of rights, not allowing to vote or intercepting mail. So all of these are types of abuse. The one that's the easiest to try to get taken care of would be the physical abuse, if you're reporting. The rest of them tend to get reported and investigated, but not necessarily go anywhere, unfortunately. Neglect, failure to provide food, shelter, clothing, medical care. And then there's self-abuse and neglect, intentionally or unintentionally not taking care of themselves. So there's a couple of questions in the PowerPoint you can go through. What type of abuse is this? We'll go on to the policy implications. Strained families must have more help available to them, and that's going to be increasing more and more. So help from social services, home care services, protective services, personal care services, and family counseling. And those services are incredibly expensive. And so especially when we've been raising the minimum wage, which is causing even home health care workers at the very least have to be paid minimum wage and overtime if they stay more than 8 hours. And there's so many complications to this, and it's only going to get worse. So something to think and pray about. There's training programs for police and other first responders to recognize abuse and neglect. And then there's avenues for investigation and hopefully prosecution to people that have been abused, or for people that have been abused. So there are some predictors of mistreatment: poverty, race, cognitive impairment, living with someone else, and the caretaker's dependencies. In nursing homes, older people are more at risk in institutions than at home. Probably, obviously, because the people don't know them or love them. Over 30% of nursing home staff report having witnessed abuse. And fortunately, laws and monitoring have been tightened, but it still happens. I had a grandmother that was in her late 80s, and she was severely abused in a convalescent home. And they had tied her up and she was bruised all over. It was incredibly sad. So something to watch out for in our field for sure. Fraud. Older people can be good targets because they often have assets, something that most of the rest of us don't have right now, right? They want to increase their retirement income because they're afraid of not having enough, and they're isolated and lonely. So they're embarrassed, and so they probably won't even report it in many cases. So there are many types of fraud: social referral, land fraud, home equity fraud, mail order, television, telemarketing, credit card fraud, across the board. Door-to-door sales, investment fraud. My mother-in-law was a victim of an investment fraud. She bought into a cricket farm. Long story, but they got her for almost $150,000. So there's a lot of real low lifes out there. So why do you think the elderly are easy targets for fraud? And then guardianship. The elderly in guardianship courts are afforded fewer rights than criminal defendants, which is really sad. Courts often do not have much evidence that guardianship is needed. And under guardianship, an individual can no longer receive money or pay bills, marry, or choose where to live. So that's something that you would want to be very careful, if you were an older person, and watch out for that for your clients as well if you're in that situation. Part D, Medicare Part D provides drug coverage, and it's very complicated, and there's many opportunities for fraud there. And then there is medical quackery. Americans spend about $27 billion on quack products or treatments. Arthritis products, cancer cures, AIDS cures, weight loss, sexual aids, all of those. And then there's drug abuse. Older Americans consume 30% of all prescription drugs, and over-the-counter drugs. And a lot of times that's not being regulated by the nursing homes or by caretakers well enough to, or even the doctors by coordinating it. Alcohol generally goes down with age, but it's usually accompanied by smoking, and it's usually a lifelong pattern. Promoting consumer education is vital to help these people through this time, and that's something that we can help with in our sessions. So go ahead and go through the review. How likely are older people to be victimized? What can be done to help elderly fight crime, etc. And again, work on your cornerstone. Don't you love it? Go ahead and work on your capstone report and your discussion board, and I look forward to seeing the rest of your papers.